Welcome, folks. Welcome. Let people churn in here. All right, and we will begin. Welcome to This Clinical Life. My name is Stephen Beeson. I am a family medicine physician, father of two dogs, and founder of a company called Practicing Excellence. And today we're diving in deep to a topic called the clinician's search for meaning. And I'm here with an amazing guest, my friend and colleague, Stef Simmons. Stef, do you want to say hello?
Hello, everyone. I am Stefanie Simmons. I'm an emergency medicine physician by training who leads professional well-being work for clinicians and is the chief medical officer for the Lorna Breen Foundation. I'm also, I'm in charge of some people. So I have 3 daughters, 2 cats, 2 snakes, and currently a goldfish. Steve, thanks for setting the tone.
The Simmons Farm.
The Simmons Farm.
Oh my gosh. Well, Stef, do you remember the first time we met? Do you remember when that was?
I do, but I'm not sure if we're thinking of the same first time.
Yeah, it was a long time ago. It was at IHA.
Yes.
And I have to tell you, that's not the topic of this, but human relationships are. And you were a star back then. Not a star like look at me kind of star, but a star in terms of just a particular passion for human connectivity and making a difference. And you were a challenger, challenging the status quo. And I saw that even as a student in that leadership academy. So I just got to tell you, I'm super proud of you and the profound work that you're and the difference that you're making right now. So I want to begin with people getting to know you a little bit, in addition to being an ED physician and CMO for the Lorna Breen's Hero Foundation, which is an incredible organization that you'll have a chance to talk about, in addition to a national voice in physician wellness within Envision and on a stage in many places. Tell us something about you that would surprise us.
Okay. So when I was an undergrad at University of Michigan, I had the opportunity to perform on stage in the Fisher Theater in Detroit, across from B.B. King, legendary musician. The reason for that was that the Northwest Airlines at the time was opening a direct Detroit to Beijing flight path, and B.B. King was there on stage representing Detroit. And I was on stage representing Beijing as part of a traditional Kung Fu troupe that performed traditional Chinese lion dance. And so I got to do the lion dance on stage and meet B.B. King and his famous guitar Lucille afterwards.
Well, I was not expecting.
Well, that's what you asked for.
So yeah, well, yeah, you surprised us. So that was great. So how do you go from sort of ED bedside physician to sort of national advocate for clinician well-being? How'd that happen?
Oh, the hard way. So I was not one of those people who from the early age knew I wanted to be a physician. Mm-hmm. I am an inveterate bookworm and reader and lover of history. And I thought I was going to be a history professor, working in an academic setting, thinking about the pathways of human existence and why people do what they do, and sort of putting my own spin on that. So when I was doing some soul searching during my college years, thinking about what I wanted to do with my life, I realized that I needed a more direct connection to the way that my work was helping people in the world. Right. So I truly believe that people who study history and write books and teach history are making a huge positive impact in the world. But for me personally, I needed that person in front of me. And that's why I went into medicine. I do not come from a family of physicians or healthcare workers of any sort. And when I started medical school, I did not even know what residency was. So I had no idea the roller coaster I was in for.
The beauty of ignorance sometimes.
Yeah, sometimes ignorance is bliss. And so I just threw myself into medical school, wholeheartedly tasting all of the different opportunities and specialties. And actually didn't even match into emergency medicine initially, but into anesthesiology, and then switched into emergency medicine because all of the things I loved about anesthesiology were there: birth to death care, procedures, shift work, critical care. Plus I got to talk to people for longer, and really for people who were having the worst day of their lives, right? An opportunity to really make an impact on them. But residency, as it is for many people, was not easy for me. And all of the fatigue that comes with those long 80 to 100-hour weeks, and all of the learning how to not only deal with your own stresses, right, but to witness the trauma and stresses of your patients. All of that, and the sleep deprivation, was compounded by the fact that I had not only my first child, but my second child while I was a resident. So I was dealing with the sleep deprivation of being a first-time and second-time parent as well. And as well as postpartum depression with my second child. So it was a whirlwind 4 years, and I exited residency into my early career really in if you think of wellness as a mountain, I was in the bottom of a pit that had been dug at the foot of the mountain, right? Really struggling, and watching my colleagues and my fellow residents and early careerists struggling as well. So when I thought about what I wanted my career to be, it was very much still caring for the patients in front of me, but it was also caring for myself and my colleagues, and ultimately thinking about ways to heal healthcare and the process by which we train our healthcare workers and the way that they work, so that we have healthy healthcare workforce and can impact patients in even a more positive way.
You know, that so resonates. I think all of us that have, a deep passion for helping care team members find the awesomeness of this healing profession have been in a dark spot. And there's been some sort of event or experience that said, oh, that's what it can be like. And gatewaying to the power of meaning. I believe that the human condition is designed to make a difference in the world in some way. There's a million ways to do it. So I'm curious, and I want to ask you a question in terms of where meaning stacks up, feeling as though you're living a life of meaning. You've captured meaning, whatever that vague notion is. There's a lot of things we can do to advance wellness. We can reduce administrative burden. We can strike work-life balance. We can optimize the EHR. We can recognize and appreciate clinicians. We can give them a voice in decisions. There's things that we know in the checklist of well-being that are proven to work. Where would you put the discovery of meaning in that stack of solutions and experiences that drive, care team member, nurse, physician well-being? Where does meaning integrate with all of that?
A lot of times we'll refer to that famous pyramid, right? And we'll have the basic needs at the bottom, and we'll have meaning at the top. I think it needs and is flipped, so that without meaning, really as the basis of everything else,
right,
it's hard to even appreciate all of the other good things that are happening, and certainly all of the challenges and the slings and arrows of our profession will take on even a harder a harder meaning for us. So if you ask me where I think meaning sits, it's the foundation for everything we do.
So if you were, and you've been through a lot in terms of the trough of life that you went through during residency and getting in with just lots of life challenges and stressors, and you've had a chance to sort of discover the power of relationships and difference making to lift your clinical experience and then to be able to advocate for that more broadly. If you were to advise with all your experience and knowledge now, if you were to advise a clinician sort of the 30-year-old Stef on, or just finishing your training,
Yeah.
and you can impart wisdom about living life of purpose and how to do it specifically, and how to transcend from exhaustion and weariness to I'm super proud of who I am. What would you advise a clinician like that?
If I had 30-year-old Stef in front of me, the first thing I would do is give her a big hug and say, it's going to be okay. Hand her a coffee, offer to hold the baby. And then as we had a chance to start our conversation, I would ask my past self, and I think challenge anyone who's facing this sort of challenge is, where are you spending your mental energy? What are the messages you're telling yourself? And how much investment in time and effort are you giving this particular issue of meaning? Because there are an infinite number of tasks to fill the day, not only in our professional careers in medicine, but also in our personal lives. And if we don't make space and time to think about the role that meaning plays in our lives, what is important to us, and what actions and what time we're spending in our life toward those meaningful values, then we're shortchanging ourselves. And frankly, we're shortchanging everyone who has access to our time and ourselves as well. So that's a place to start. For a lot of people, you ask that question and the answer is 0, right? Like, I don't have time for that.
Right.
It's one of those things like exercise, where when you make time and space for it, you have more time and space. Like if you exercise, you have more energy. So you need to start somewhere.
Well, you mentioned an intervention that drives meaning as let me hold the baby and let me get you a cup of coffee and let me give you a hug. The power of developing relationships with colleagues, with friends, with families, and with patients is the essence of meaning, right? I mean, it's we made a difference in some way with someone that is proximal to us, and it was interesting. And I've got another harder question for you that I'm going to ask that actually came from the people submitting questions. And we got some fantastic questions from the listeners, and I'm going to share a few. But I was up with Providence just yesterday, and we had a chance to sort of, what got you into this healthcare journey and what's keeping you here. And it was uniform. I want to make a difference in the lives of those that I care for. I want to make a difference in the lives of those that I care for. And it was like this longing for meaning and purpose of why they joined. And sometimes the administrative burdens that come, we forget how and why we are here. But there's this deep intrinsic longing of, I want to make a difference in the lives of those that I serve. And we have such access and proximity and dominion over that as clinicians, right? I mean, if we can't do it in healthcare, then it's like, what the hell? So the question I want to ask that came in was, with how do we source this? If we're, as individual clinicians, we can build relationships, we can reflect on who we want to be, we can carve out time to care for self, we can spin the self-talk to to something different than self-criticism, take care of us. There's lots of things we can do to fuel individual meaning. But if we're from a leader perspective, how do we source and support our clinicians to rediscover meaning when they're so overwhelmed and exhausted? What would you advise leaders based upon your best of thinking?
So I think there's two parts to this. And the first is really a mindset.
Mhm.
And a leadership, an aspect of leadership, which is sharing part of yourself with the people that you're leading. And, I wonder how many people, if they were asked, what drives your leader to do what they do, would come up with what actually is the meaning of the work for that person. Because too often we don't share what drives us, what we're actually here to do with the people that we're leading. And so that's would be my first challenge to leaders, is make sure to vulnerably share in an appropriate way, in an appropriate time with your teams why you're there. And that does two things. Number one, you're then accountable for fulfilling that meeting with your teams, right? And number two, they're going to be able to share with you what they need for you to do that. And that's a huge first step. Second, I would say there are a myriad of projects, quality improvement projects, operational projects ongoing at any time in any hospital, health system, medical group. It's just, if you had a spreadsheet with all of them for every organization across the country, you could probably pave the road across the nation. We need to take every single one of those quality projects, operational initiatives, and look at that through the lens of how it impacts the people doing the work. So this is how you take those triple aim quality initiatives and really transform them into that quadruple aim, including the well-being of the healthcare workforce. It often isn't more work. It's just like a 15-degree adjustment on how you view the work, and adding in a performance indicator or a measure around that impact really allows you to then hold yourself, your teams accountable for that work as well.
That those are such eloquently stated efforts. One of the things that's really interesting is I was with Baycare Medical Group also yesterday. Yesterday was a busy day. And they're launching this effort called Wellness is Everything. So they have like this single imperative about the well-being of their team. And there's real value in that. And because clinicians' ability to experience meaning and the beauty of the healing life is about, I feel like I have some oxygen and I've got some air cover, and there's people around me and our leaders that are lifting my burden and looking out for me. We don't have to fix everything. Medicine's still going to be super hard. We can still see a lot of patients, but being in a culture where we're getting cues and actions that say, you matter here, you count, and we're going to do everything we can to lift our burden, and communicating that to their clinicians, so they go, we're in a place that's got our back. Greg, I love the comment came from Greg Stefanek, and if you could talk, then we would open the mic. But it was so great about what a beautiful, profession this is. We're not victims, and and we have options to be able to make this incredibly fulfilling. One of the other questions I want to ask for you, Stef, is, we talk about meaning, and we've all been in the clinical trenches for a long time. What do you find to be the most meaningful thing in your work now? You're CMO of Lorna Breen Heroes Foundation, and obviously working nationally with Envision still. And if you could say, I derive my meaning from X, what's that thing for you?
So Steve, do you have that little cache of thank you notes from patients still
Yeah, do
from
you want me to go get it?
yeah, I know.
I
I
have
can
two
mine
of
is
them.
actually in hands reach right now. Um,
Yeah.
so I don't see patients right now. And I've had many people ask me the question, like, do you miss taking care of patients? And what I always say is, I do, but I would a lot more if I weren't still taking care of the house of medicine and the healthcare workers who were working within it, right? And so just like that cache of thank you notes from patients is so valuable, the most meaningful thing in my work right now is when I hear from an individual that I have impacted, whether it's through speaking or a program I've developed that has impacted their life, or a resource that they had access to because they found out about it through the work we are doing, or a change in a policy or a procedure that allows people more access to care or reduces stigma for care. I'm starting a new pile of those notes as well. And to me, the knowledge that the work I'm doing is making a substantive difference to an individual and to a system is really the most meaningful part of my work. And I'm very thankful that people take the time to reach out and let me know, because metrics are great and we need to measure success and we need to understand what those key performance indicators are, but nothing matches someone taking the time to say that you've made a difference.
You know, it is, that's meaning, right? And, you know, organizations, leaders, departments will say, how do we restore purpose in the clinical walk, in this clinical life? And I always tell clinicians, you can do it with a Starbucks barista, you can do it with a waiter at a restaurant, you can do it with your son and your daughter, you can do it with your spouse, and you can certainly do it with the patients in front of you. We choose how we get to decide to impact people by how we interface with them. And this sort of live to give sort of life mantra is under the hood of every person I've ever known who is living a rich, fulfilling life. And our ability to accommodate the metrics, of course, the metrics of healthcare are the metrics of healthcare, but the capacity to achieve them is we mobilize people around a cause and making a difference that syncs with why we're all here. That access is discretionary effort. So I want to, anyway, you're raising your hand, and just, you don't have to raise your hand, just start talking.
I'm going to
Because
talk. I loved your list of everyone throughout your day that you can impact with the way that you interact with them. But I think you left the most important person off of the list, which is like, we need to be as intentional about the way we treat ourselves.
yeah.
And it's really, that is where everything springs from. And there is a pathology in medicine where people are so giving and they're so outside and other focused that they will actually do that to failure without taking care of their own needs first. And this work around identifying and feeding your meaning is part of that. But, you know, gosh, we spend so much time almost bragging on the physical and personal sacrifices we're making in our work. And I think there's a real need to gut check ourselves on that. I mean, so many times I would finish a shift and say, yeah, you know, I've got an empty stomach and a full bladder. I haven't eaten in 18 hours, but, you know, living the dream. And I think we really need to hold ourselves and each other accountable to taking those moments to make sure that we are able to access that well of empathy and compassion that so many people enter medicine with, wanting to grow that and to live that. And if we don't protect it, it is a well that can run dry.
100%. And a strong believer, and that was so beautifully said. And I would also encourage the listeners in terms of how do we build meaning in work when it's so powerful, yet so elusive and so diluted by virtue of just the workforce instability and administrative burden that so many are going through right now. But one of the things is not only, what do we say to ourselves? But I think what we say about ourselves can be greatly impacted by what people say to us. Mm-hmm. And I remember a time when I was, and I've told the story before, I told it last night. That's why it's sitting in my brain. But I was a young physician, and we had, I was 2 years into practice, and everybody's got imposter syndrome. Like, I tricked everybody that I'm here. It's like people are going to find out that I'm not that smart or whatever. Everybody's got this sort of self-doubt, and so we rely on sometimes external cues as to, do we belong or not? And I remember I was sitting in an exam room, and my nurse knocks on the door. She says, Dr. O, that's not his real name, but Dr. O is on the phone for you. He's one of our cardiologists, and he's one of our invasive cardiologists at the Sharpie-Steele Medical Group. Super smart, but super unfiltered, if you know what I mean. So
I know what
he always spoke very honestly about what he thought about you. And so I was going, oh my God. So anyway, so I'm walking to my office, I pick up the phone, and David is his name. He said, hey, Steve, David O, just want to let you know that consult you sent to me for atypical chest pain and palpitations, great workup. I wouldn't have done it any different myself. Patient loves you. I just wanted to let you know. Well done.
Were you just
like 27
walking on
years
sunshine
ago.
for the rest of the day?
No, it was a belonging cue that I'm okay. I'm part of the crew. And he changed. He could have destroyed me in that moment, and I would have felt differently about myself. So my self-talk would have been, you suck, you suck, you suck, you suck, as opposed to, nice work. So we can be a cue creator for all the people that we touch, and we can finish our day and say, that's meaningful.
So you've just sparked two thoughts, and the first is like, really, my sort of research nerd is going to come out here for a moment. But we know that people, and particularly people in healthcare, learn from two things. They learn from failure, and traditionally we have tapped into that big time. M&M, Q&A, root cause analysis, boom, boom, right. And then they learn from unexpected success. Meaning, I didn't expect that to go well, and it did. I didn't expect that consultant call to go well, and it did. It surprised me. We need to tap in more to learning from unexpected success for ourselves and our colleague. Right. M&M should be Morbidity, Mortality, and Magnificence Conference, right? So that we can celebrate, right. Triple M. We can celebrate the times that things went truly well, and not just focus on that gap analysis of how to bring things up to expected success. That's one of the tenets of positive organizational psychology, and something we could definitely benefit from in medicine. The other thing your story made me think about was that the idea of imposter syndrome is experienced differently by different people within medicine, depending on how well you fit the view of what a clinician looks like for whatever your role is. So that may include your age, your gender, your race and ethnicity, whether you have, what color your hair is it gray, is it brown, do you have alopecia, like what do you look like? And do other people respond to you as if you are a physician, a nurse, based on that identity? And I think, I can only speak from the identity of being a woman, but when you get feedback, when you get comments from patients, from colleagues that aren't affirming in your role, that feeds that imposter syndrome instead of helping to allay it. And so I also just really challenge people to double down on those positive feedback for positive actions, particularly with people who don't necessarily fit that existing dominant view of what a clinician looks like to them, because it's even more important. And for me, the way that often played out was throughout the shift, throughout the day, probably 5 or even 6 times a day, somebody would ask me, if I were the nurse, or when I was much younger, if I was the nursing student. And so much respect for my nursing colleagues, but that wasn't my role. And sometimes it didn't help with that imposter syndrome in my role as the lead physician on the team to have that comment over and over again. So we also need to be really aware of the identity of our colleagues and how we can respect their role and the training and the time they've spent to achieve that.
That's such a great reminder and an important tenet in terms of how do we become a force for good and to help and support people in their role and identity, and to understand different people are subject to different cues that they may receive. That can you get that for me, nursing student? And
That's
you're going, what the? Yeah. So the other thing that you mentioned was failure as a learning mechanism. And in terms of striking meaning, there's one exercise that I would encourage listeners to consider. You might need some wine for this one, but it's called My Darkest Teacher. Mm. And it's an opportunity for people in a safe environment. I've done it in leadership conferences. There is weeping, there is hugging, there is mobilizing around human connectivity, and it's people sharing the hardest thing they've ever been through and how it makes them who they are today. And clinicians who talk about a patient that they just saw went home and committed suicide, and how that's made them the compassionate clinician they are today, mindful of what people may be going through. And that sharing that vulnerability of those dark teachers is meaning. I mean, I've had a chance to share my darkest moment that I've never shared with anybody, and I've had other people do the same, and we've built relationships that are authentic and raw. I have meaning, just meaning. So when you talked about failure, incredibly powerful,
there's two options, right? When there's a trauma, because losing a patient is a trauma to a clinician, and these events are traumas, and there's an opportunity for post-traumatic growth, right? And then there's also negative adaptations to trauma that can contribute to burnout, can contribute to substance use disorders, frankly, avoidance, which in medicine may be seen as leaving, right? Leaving the practice of medicine, unfortunately, leaving life, if somebody feels like they can't leave the practice of medicine. And so the things that we know can sort of help steer that trauma response towards that post-traumatic growth are critical. And I like to think of it as an aerobic process, right? So this is, again, the science mind comes out, but it gets better with light and air. So when we can have some space to share and shine some light on our darkest moments, they lose some of their power over us, and have more of a chance to transform like compost aerobically into the fertile soil for our future selves instead of rotting. And that's important.
It's so again, so well said. Steph, I'm just soaking everything in that you say. One of the things that I think is a real reflection of meaning and a great catalyst in a group, in addition to my darkest teacher, which is a brutal one, it's hard. It's hard, but it's beautiful. And it's the essence of meaning and human connectivity and being there for one another, that people will be hugging each other, coming to their side. And to facilitate those kinds of authentic, vulnerable, safe relationships, under those conditions, we can do anything. When we're alone and unsafe and no air cover, this is a freaking exhausting life. So one of the other things in exercises, and I don't know if I'm sure you've done this as well, but asking a room full of care team members, what's been your best moment you've ever had as a care team member? And just, you can take one of your meetings where you're going over your metrics and say, you know what, we're going to scratch that one. We're going to talk about our best moments, the best moment that's etched in your memory as the thing that stands out, and allow people to go around the room and share. And having done this with thousands, it is the same thing every time. I made a difference in a meaningful, powerful way that made me proud of who I was.
Yeah. I had somebody, so I have worked through that exercise with people in a room, and somebody once said to me, and I love this, and I've carried it to this day, is it made a difference that I was the one there that day, right? I'm not interchangeable. My skill set that I've worked so hard to develop and practice and make into an art of medicine, all of that effort culminated in it mattering that I was the one there. And sometimes when I'm having a hard day, I take that pearl out from, ostensibly I was the teacher that day, but it turns out, as it often does, that I was taught a beautiful lesson, and I carry that phrase forward with me.
It
So,
is.
I think that what we need to keep in mind as healthcare leaders is that all of our teammates are so valuable and precious as part of the team, as individuals, as humans and fellow humanity, but also as part of the team. That relationship and maintenance of that relationship is critical. And so part of what we need to be doing is, when we know that our teams are struggling, and everyone, I hope, now knows that, like, in medicine, our teams are struggling. We know that from surveys, we know that from people telling us, we know that from people leaving. When people are struggling, we need to do two things. So emergency medicine here coming out, the first thing we need to do is just to hold pressure and stop the bleeding, right? So have ways that people can access emergency psychological and mental health care, which means making sure those resources are available to them, but also removing the stigma around accessing them through licensing and credentialing reform. And then after we've held pressure and the bleeding is tamped off a little bit, we need to address the cause, right? One of those causes is sharing meaning in our organizations, maintaining those relationships, and being the type of leader where those conversations can happen. Another piece of that is making sure that we are viewing all of our operational and quality initiatives through the lens of the impact on the clinician, as well as the impact on the patient. And so, once we've got the bleeding stopped and the cause of bleeding addressed, then, right, and only then can we grow and move forward. And so it's critical that we be thinking about things in this framework and schema, and really engaging with the work on both sides, right? Our leadership and operational side, and our mental health well-being side for our clinicians.
And I think that it's important to think of, there is no single intervention that advances the well-being of clinician. The presence of meaning, and my life has meaning, I think, is a dependency to access wellness. There's no amount of money, there is no possession there is almost no achievement that replaces meaning in terms of my life is worth it. I mean, it's that important. And now I think the research is now validating that. It's people who have meaning live enriched lives. So the question is, in this distracted and sometimes dysfunctional industry that we call American healthcare, how do we foster it? And I think you said it so well. I think there are things that we do organizationally by prioritizing our caregiving team, signaling you matter most, and having executive accountability around engagement and well-being and resources to make it happen. So we're saying the thing that will allow us to achieve all of our goals is the engaged, healthy, retained talent. There's things we can do within our teams, right? Within our clinical microsystems, where we help and support and encourage each other, know each other, lift each other, cry on each other's shoulder, go out for beers, go for a walk, go for a run. There's a family tribe. And there's things we can do one-on-one with our teammates and with our patients that boom, right? We choose, we can go be that encourager and find meaning.
And our newest teammates, the people who are just coming on, right? The new grads, the new nurse who's just coming from a new setting or has just graduated nursing school, we have a chance to get it right the first time with those people as well. So really being mindful about how we welcome them into our teams, how we make sure that over that first year or even two, they get a chance to learn the ropes in a way that's supportive. They have a friend at work, right? And they're not just sort of thrown into the middle of the ocean, sink or swim in the middle of this very difficult time in healthcare. So that's an example of a way that just a reorientation of the lens on how we support and help people through connection in those first years and months of working can make a career difference for those folks over decades.
Like Dr. O did for me. that was and literally it was less than 30 seconds.
Steve, have you told him?
Yes, I have. He just retired.
Good.
And he doesn't remember it. So anyway, but he was euphoric when I told him.
Oh, good.
And life is made of moments, and we can be moment makers for people by becoming encouragers and supporters and even challengers to help people believe in themselves, and us to use that feedback to affirm that we are actually indeed making a difference. So, Stef, I just loved having you as a guest. Again, as I mentioned, so proud of the work that you're doing and the incredible work of the Lorna Breen Heroes Foundation. And we didn't even have a chance to talk about that, but it was the impact that you've had nationally. And share us a little, I don't want to do your bragging for you, but regulatory changes that have occurred in numerous states now in diminishing the mental health query and credentialing, say nothing about the $100 million to help support well-being. Share a little bit about what Lorna Breen has done.
Sure. And so just very briefly, for those of you who aren't familiar with the foundation, Lorna was an emergency medicine physician in New York City, chair of emergency medicine, left her family where she'd been on a ski vacation to come back and care for patients in the first wave, ultimately contracted COVID herself, returned to work as soon as she was allowed to, but in the setting of fatigue and what we now know to be post-COVID syndrome, right, became very unable to keep up mentally and physically with the work. Her family extracted her from New York, and she was admitted for her first and only mental health care, psychiatric care in that setting. And after her discharge, died by suicide. Her family, who her brother-in-law was an experienced healthcare leader of the president of the UVA medical group, started the Lorna Breen Foundation to reduce healthcare worker suicide and to reduce the burden of burnout among the healthcare workforce. It's been my honor to be on their board and now their chief medical officer. So we really operate in three realms, and the first is advocacy, and that includes the passage of the Dr. Lorna Breen Provider Protection Act, which was first of its kind legislation passed last spring, funding over $140 million for research on clinician burnout and well-being programs. The second is awareness, so speaking, helping organizations and state and government organizations as well understand what the healthcare workforce is facing. And then the third is really advancing solutions. So helping organizations, helping government organizations, state organizations think through what they can do and providing resources on what's attainable and can be done right now to address clinician well-being and reduce suicide. So one of those initiatives, and one that I'd love everyone listening to this to take a look at, is to reform licensing and credentialing questions on state medical board applications and hospital credentialing and peer review questions. So I see Matt has dropped the URL for the website in the chat, but you'll see there a map of all 50 states. And as of last week, 20 of those states now are in compliance with best practices for their licensing questions, and we're hoping to expand that number. I say of last week because Virginia last week passed a law that you can't ask about mental health care on state board questions. So everyone here who works at a hospital, works in a health system, I'd encourage you to look at the toolkit for how to evaluate, how to improve, and then how to communicate back to your workforce your credentialing questions as a great substantive first step to support your clinician workforce.
Well, thank you for the work that you're doing. You're making, and Corey and so many others there are making a big difference, and it's just an honor to stand beside that crew. And talking about dark teachers in Lorna Breen's life. And the story was released by the New York Times without the family's permission.
That's right. So they had a choice of what they were going to do with that disclosure that had been forced on them, right? And I think it's to me, it's been an inspiring story of post-traumatic growth, right? And what a family and now an organization can do in the setting of being handed this trauma, and transforming that into work that supports and makes things better for millions of people across the country.
Well, Lorna's very proud, and it was an unfathomable price that family paid. And everybody that knew and loved her, I never knew her, but I feel like I do. And again, the loss of one is not okay. So I'm going to close with my good friend Gene Ginterman. Love you, brother. It says to love someone is to learn the song in their heart and to sing it to them when they have forgotten. And each of us have a chance to live lives of meaning, of impact, of purpose, and helping and supporting others, and to be kind and compassionate for ourselves. Regardless of what's happening in our crazy industry, we can decide who we're going to be for the people beside us and ourselves. We choose. So with that, thank you so much, Stef, for being a wonderful guest, an inspiring guest on This Clinical Life. And thank you for each of you for attending. We will be sending out a recording soon and posting it. And we're grateful for each and every one of you. Keep your head up, take care of each other, and we're out.